count all these things. Okay, thank you. Okay, my story involves this person, who is my son. His name is Pedro. And I just wanted to bring his photo so that you could have a chance to see what a fine companion he was for me in this story. This is Pedro, my second son. In 1991, when I returned to Alaska, where I had grown up, returned from living in Italy for over 23 years, I was 50 years old. I had left behind 23 years of life in a country that I really loved. Both of my sons were born there. And there were a couple of reasons why I wanted to come back to Alaska. First of all, having grown up here, I still had my family living here. We had come to Alaska in 1947, and I went through all of grade school and high school here and graduated from high school, the one high school that was in Anchorage High School in 1959. So we came back. I brought my two sons because one of the main reasons I wanted to come back and spend some time here was I really wanted to spend a full turn of the seasons together with my two sons in the country where I had grown up, because they had been born and raised in Italy, and I wanted them to have a chance to know their motherland, not just their fatherland. So one of the first things that we had to deal with was that we needed to go to work immediately, all three of us. My sons at the time were in their late teens, and they were excited, of course, about coming to Alaska. So my son, Pedro, who had just turned 18 at the time, and I were hired to work in Valdez at a fish processing plant. We came back in the beginning of July, spent a couple of weeks kind of getting our feet on the ground and living with my folks. And then we went down to the local job service and were talked into accepting the offer from a fish processing plant in Valdez. And the thing that sold us on going there, besides the excitement of it, was that they had a new bunkhouse. And the bunkhouse, the woman who interviewed us assured us, would be nice and clean because it was new. And that would, of course, take one of the difficulties of doing fish processing in a lot of the outlying places of Alaska off our shoulders, which we would have a dry and clean place to sleep without having to pay for or tent out in Valdez where it rained all the time. So it was a pretty exciting experience for us and a pretty exciting idea. So the next day we jumped in our car and we drove to Valdez. We left early in the morning, arrived in Valdez about noon, and checked in, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon we were both on the slime line. And of course, I had grown up in Alaska, and I'd fished, and I had, pulled fish and picked fish with friends and so on the Kenai Peninsula, but I'd never worked in a processing plant, and obviously Pedro never had either. So it was a totally new experience. And this particular plant was not a huge one, but the way that they had, how many of you have ever worked in a processing plant? Any of you? Okay, so you'll recognize some of this stuff. If you haven't, I thoroughly believe, after having had this experience, it's something that every Alaskan should give to themselves as a gift once in their lives. Maybe for a month. Maybe for a month. It was an incredible experience. Anyway, the way this place was set up was that the fish would be taken off the boats with through a great big vacuum tube that brought the fish into the plant. And then they would be dumped onto a couple of slime lines. And the one that we were working on was actually a sort of water conveyor belt. And the fish were put into, first went to the cutting table. So they would go by, they would be dumped there, and the guys that were working there, they were absolute masters with these wonderful knives that they had. And they would gut the fish and then throw them into this water conveyor belt, which then carried it down to the next group of workers. And the entrails would fall into these great big totes that were beneath the tables. And so here we were, Pietro and I, now standing side by side at along this water conveyor belt, and our job was, and I can't do this very well holding the microphone, but was simply to reach into this trough and grab a fish as it came by. It had already been gutted, and our job was simply to take our thumb and run it down the bloodline and remove the bloodline and rinse it off a little bit and then lift it up and put it into a smaller trough which ran on down so that it was carried down to the next group of workers who would be grading them and then putting them into a freezer. So after 2 hours of repetitive movements like this, the water was icy cold. It was the seawater that was flowing through the water. We were well dressed and equipped. We had heavy boots, and they had supplied us with aprons and thick, heavy rubber gloves that were lined with thick cotton gloves inside of them. But in spite of all that, the water was absolutely freezing, and our hands became very cold. So every once in a while, someone would come, and we would find a 5 or 10 gallon bucket of hot water sitting beside us. And the first time it happened is, what in the world? Well, we were to turn around and put our hands with our gloves in it into the water to warm them up so that we would not be damaged that badly by the cold, because it was that cold. So after 2 hours of this repetitive movement, grab the fish, run your thumb along it, pick the fish up, put it in the next one, grab the next fish, etc. It was break time. The whistle blew, time for us to take our break. And I pulled off my gloves to warm my hands up and realized that my hands were completely swollen and had turned black. They were completely, or purpley black, like your jacket. And they hurt. Oh, as they started to warm up, they hurt so badly. And I looked at my hands and thought, well, this isn't going to work very well, is it? For me, I was 50 years old. Pietro didn't have this difficulty. He was 18. So Pietro looked at my hands and said, Ma, you better go and talk to the foreman. So I went over to the foreman and showed him my hands and said, I don't think I should do this anymore. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to be losing this job after 2 hours, And he said, no, I agree with you. Go talk to the boss. So I go talk to the boss, and the boss gives me some aspirin cream and a couple of aspirin and says, go take your break and come back. We'll find something else for you to do the rest of the day. So I was then promoted now. We had our little break and warmed up, and the aspirin helped me out, and the aspirin cream. And when I came back, I was escorted to my new place of work, which was still in the slime line area. But there were these large, probably about 8 by 8 foot square plywood platforms that were about waist high that were sitting there. And the entrails of the fish that were gathered from the cutting and the slime line and the machine, some of the machinery that chopped the heads and the tails off the fish and gutted them, were carried to this big table and dumped on the table. And my job now was to go through the entrails of the fish and pull out the eggs, and to separate the eggs, the roe, from the entrails. And I kid you not, it actually felt warm. It actually felt warm to my hands. And when I think about it, I think, no, the fish were cold to begin with. They were still cold when they went there, but when I put my hands with the gloves on them into that pile of entrails, I really felt, oh man, this is heaven. This is just absolutely heaven. I got used to the smell pretty quickly, and I got through that, the rest of that day with no problem, and did that for another 2 or 3 days. I loved working in that atmosphere. While I was there, I got to be moved, I don't know for what reasons, but I got to be moved to different kinds of positions within the plant. And one of them was, of course, the gathering of the roe. What happened to the roe after we separated it out? It was then carried to a separate room where there was a crew of Japanese experts who were washing it, cleaning it, and packing it, and then freezing it and shipping it to Japan, where it's a very high-level delicacy caviar in salmon eggs. And so I got a chance while I was there to actually work with the Japanese in the room there, packing boxes and that sort of thing, and then finally was promoted to the best job that I had there, which was to the box room. And the box room was really a cool place because it was up above it was kind of a loft above the rest of the plant, and we could sit up there and watch the whole operation that was going on down below us. And having been in Italy for so many years, and we had a vineyard there and lived in a part of the countryside where harvest was a big deal. The wine harvest, the grape harvest was a big deal. And it felt the same way. You know, this was harvest, and it was exciting. And everybody was working as hard and as fast as they could. And we worked usually 12-hour shifts, which was one of the reasons we had taken this job. Because although it didn't pay very much, maybe $10 an hour or something like that, we would get lots of overtime and lots of as much as we wanted, and that was important for us. So that was the work part of it. The box room. And the box room was a great, really groovy job because all I had to do, it wasn't even cold. It was warm, it was well lighted, we could watch the rest of the people doing all the hard work down there, and all I did was paste labels on plastic boxes for the rest of my time there. It was great. It was really great also because a lot of the young people who were working there on their break time would come up, and it was warm and it was cozy up there, and they would just sit around and chat during their break time. So it was wonderful. It was a fantastic experience. The rest of this story has to do with the bunkhouse. Now, the bunkhouse was indeed clean and was indeed new. It was co-ed, and it was also, there were probably, I'm trying to say probably 150 or 200 people that were able to sleep in that bunkhouse. And the way that it was set up was that there were two bunk beds, two sets of bunk beds in a kind of cubicle. And then they would be separated by a higher piece of plywood, which provide a kind of privacy between those cubicles. So Pietro and I were assigned the bunks in this one cubicle, and I got the bottom bunk and he got the top one. And what they had neglected to tell us, they had said, now remember, you must take your own sleeping bag and your pillow and anything like that you're going to need, because they don't supply those things. What they forgot to tell us was they also didn't have any mattress pads or mattresses on these plywood bunks. And so the first night we slept on those bunks, they were cold, they were hard, and it was really difficult the first couple of nights. But we scrounged a little bit of cardboard around and made ourselves padded the bed so we had a kind of mattress. And we found out, of course, that when you work a 12-hour shift starting at 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, you don't really care whether there's a pad under you when you lay down at night or not. Because what we would do was we would work the 12-hour shift, and then you just, if you can, you go and eat. We would eat usually, there was a break room, which had about 5 microwaves in it, a couple of coffee pots, and lots of top ramen. And that was what we ate all summer. So you have your top ramen, your cup of coffee, whatever it was, brush your teeth if you could still stand up, and then you'd go over and you'd hit that bunk, and that was it until the next morning. And the next morning at 7 o'clock, the lights would go on, and the foreman would say, okay, everybody, up, out of bed. And everybody would go, and we would drag ourselves out and do it all over again. So after a couple of weeks, we were nicely settled into this routine, and it was cool. I really enjoyed it, and it was wonderful being with my son. He was having a blast, and I was enjoying it as well. So one night, everybody's in a deep sleep. What they did, of course, was that we shared our little cubicle with another fellow who worked the night shift. So we would come in and go to bed when he was getting up to go and work, because the plant worked 24 hours a day. And so one night we were all settled in. What we had done, of course, was in order to give me a little bit of privacy, was we had hung up a blanket or a sheet or something over from the top bunk down to which covered my bunk, so I had a little curtained area to sleep in that was private, since I was sharing it with 2 males. And so one night we're sound asleep, And sometime, maybe midnight, maybe after, I don't know exactly why, all at once, the lights went on in the bunkhouse. And of course, you know, everybody who was on a top bunk goes, "Hey, what the heck is going on?" Well, then the foreman's voice we hear, and he says, "Okay, guys, it'll only be a minute." He said, "I've got a couple of new recruits here, and I'm just going to show them their bunks, and then we'll be out of here." Well, what had happened was that it was toward the end of the season, the college kids were leaving, they were getting really short-handed, and the way that they dealt with this issue was to send a van into Anchorage or into Fairbanks to cruise the streets on Saturday night and pick up the drunks and the people who were looking for work, or might not be looking for work, but they basically were Shanghai, you know, and they were brought. So here we had 2 new recruits. And so one of the guys, way across the room, I hear this voice that goes, "Oh, for Christ's sakes, shut the fucking light off," you know, because this guy he's tired, he wants to sleep. Then we hear a new voice, and the new voice says, it's gravelly and deep and really, you know, it's a good old whiskey voice, smoky whiskey voice. And he says, "You might be careful what you say, boy. I just got out of jail. I've been out for 1 day, and I was in there for 8 years for killing a man." So it got really nice and quiet in the bunkhouse, and everybody settled back down. Then we hear the clunk of cowboy boots, clunk, 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 and the gentleman and his partner come right into the cubicle next to Pietro and I. But now we're separated from, these cubicles were, you know, 2-inch plywood separation wall, that was it. So we listened to them muttering and cursing and carrying on, and they finally, and getting themselves up into the bunk and settling down. And then the lights go off. I snuggle back down into my sleeping bag, and we settle back down for the rest of our night's sleep. And in a deep sleep again, and all at once come, I hear this horrible bang and rattle, and the bed shakes. And so naturally, I start to wakefulness, and it's pitch black. And I say to my son, who is sleeping in the bunk above me, in Italian, his English was not really very good yet, and so we spoke a lot in Italian. And I said, "Ma che è successo? What happened?" And he said, "È caduto mio vicino." And I heard him say, "È caduto il mio cuscino." Okay? So I said, "Boy, for a pillow, it sure made a hell of a noise." Because what I heard him say was, "My pillow fell off my bed." And so I sure made a hell of a crash. Okay, so I sort of, you know, being a good Italian mama, I push the blanket aside and I start feeling around on the floor between the 2 bunks there to try and see if I can find his pillow and give it back to him. And so I'm feeling around in there, not finding anything, and I finally say, "Pietro, ma io non trovo nessun cuscino." And he says, "Ma, non è caduto il mio cuscino, è caduto il mio vicino. My pillow didn't fall off the bed, my neighbor fell out of it." So our new neighbor had fallen off the top bunk. And I said, "Oh, okay." And so I start to snuggle back down, and it tickled me so much that I had made this exchange of words that I started to giggle. Not a good idea. I started to giggle, and I'm giggling and snuggling back down into my little place, when all at once I feel this presence beside the bed. My little curtain gets lifted up, and this form is leaning over me and breathing on me, and this voice, the gravelly voice that I had mentioned before, says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I didn't mean to disturb your rest." And I said, "Oh, that's okay, no problem. No problem at all. You just go on right back to bed." "I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to disturb your rest," he said. "Okay, fine." And so I could hear that Pietro had sat straight up in bed because he was right above me. And he's, you know, on alert, I could feel that. And so the guy starts off, but he starts to try and climb into the bunk, the empty bunk in our little cubicle. And so then Pietro says, no, buddy, no, wrong address, you live next door. And so oh, okay. And he shuffled on out, and we listened to him, try to climb back into the bunk. Right next to Pietro, he's 2 inches away from him, basically, and trying to climb back up into the bunk. And he finally gets up there and settles down, and everybody gets quiet again. And we go back to sleep. He only fell out of bed twice more that night. And the third time, he didn't even bother to climb back up into the bunk. He just stayed on the floor, because after all, it was just hard plywood, just like the bed was.
Okay. See, we left off in McGrath, didn't we? Yeah. Well, we were only there 3 years, 90 to 93. But a lot of my friends had been there 15 years, and they had all the toys. We moved there flat broke, so the best we could do was a snow machine, secondhand, broken up, and but that was fine. Everybody else had boats and ATVs and tons of snow machines. And many of them had homesteads. They had homesteaded around McGrath when it was open for such. And I would go out on the weekends or our days off, and I would help chop firewood, bring it back, so forth. We would go out and play with their cabins, building them and so forth. One of my friends, Mark Kaitonen, had been out there 15 plus years, had a nice little cabin in his homestead out on a slough off the Kuskokwim River. And I went out with him one day, and we went basically to cut a tree down. I had lots of chainsaw time in my past, so I volunteered to come out and help cut this tree down, which was leaning precariously over the cabin. And we wanted to make sure it didn't take it out during some windstorm. And I also happened to have 100 feet of really nice rescue rope, which I managed to come away from the fire department with. And so we went out and we fished, and I fished the mouth of the slough and was able to even catch a northern pike on my fly rod, so it was a pretty good day for me. This was great. We get back to the cabin, get organized, and head out for this tree, which is, 50 feet away. And we work out a plan. And the plan first involved climbing as high as we could into the tree, tie the rope off, then stretch that rope out where you want the tree to fall. And I have developed other techniques since, but at that point in time, the technique was, let's find somebody dumb enough to hang onto the end of the rope and pull. Yeah, it was me. So they're buzzsawing away, and they're getting down to the end, and I've pulled tight, the tree's moving a little, and I mean, maybe I ought to have a plan myself. I turn around and I look out across the slough and so forth, and there's this little back area that is within it's only 10 feet, and I'm running across a nice flat spot with little green grass growing in it. Okay, that's my plan. It's away from the path of the tree. As soon as I see the tree going, I'm out of here. So, buzz, 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 here comes crack, here comes the tree. Okay, we're good. Took off. Well, the only problem was, and you probably would know, I would know if I lived out there any longer before that a nice flat area isn't going to be a mountain meadow. It's going to be a swamp with pond scum. Beautiful green layer of scum across this pond. And I'm just booking, and I get to it, and I don't know what it is yet. Till I take my second step out there, I've now got it figured out. But at this point, I'm going, feet are staying behind, everything else is going out, laid out on top of this beautiful little green stuff. Well, I only brought one change of clothes, We were out there for a couple of days, and there was no real good fresh water anywhere. You had to bring your own. But there ought to be a commercial application for Pondscum. This stuff is fantastic. If you like green clothes, and you know, try as I might, I ended up basically just turning them into trash clothes, but that was one pair of Carhartts that I just could not get the green out of. Wash as I might. And of course, they were provided with a story that they just loved to tell back at the station, over and over. That's all.
That's great.
Is that working?